So let's talk about bonds, government bonds. And in this video, I want to compare basically make the case why I think Bitcoin is superior to bonds. Bonds are also known as treasuries, for those more familiar with that. So let's get into it. Number one, bonds yield less interest than inflation steals. And so this is generally true. Historically, this isn't always true, but generally, I mean, think about, the US, for example. Right now, bonds are paying, somewhere around 5%, let's say. Inflation's more than that. Inflation has obviously been a number that has been heavily manipulated, and what we put in the basket to measure inflation is obviously changing and can change in a way that can be more convenient to make the number look lower so that it can be sold to the public that the inflation you're seeing is not real. And so people know better than that. And so in many cases, not all, but if you buy a bond, you're essentially locking in a loss, right? So imagine if inflation the next year is going to be 7%, and you buy a bond for 5%. You're making -2, and you're not really getting ahead. At times of uncertainty where it's very unclear what's going to happen with the market, you can make a good case. It's probably not a bad idea to maybe buy bonds and earn a yield while you're sitting on cash waiting to see what happens. But apart from that, I think I've made the case for number one. Number two, Bitcoin trades 24/7, offering a lot more flexibility. And so if you buy a bond now and then the rates start to change and you want to get out of that position, generally, most people, it's not a 24/7 market. You can only do so while the market is open. A lot less optionality for people. Number three, bonds are as safe as their issuer's stability. So what is a bond ultimately, right? In the case of the US, you have essentially the government issuing and the Fed issuing more debt. People are buying that, giving the government your money now, and then you're getting a yield on that so that they can use your money today. And depends how stable the issuer is, right? 5% is not always 5%, right? If the currency becomes wildly, fluctuates in a very wild way, right? Or becomes highly volatile or starts to collapse or whatever, you could ultimately be left holding the bag because you're at the mercy of the issuer who created the bond being stable and solvent and actually being there, 6, 12, 18 months or however long from now that the bonds are that you bought. Now, number four, Bitcoin is not controlled by a central entity. Some similar points to number three, but again, what does that mean really when you boil it down? A central entity would be individuals, people, humans who make mistakes are at the center of it. And humans have a history of making mistakes if given too much power. And I think you can certainly argue we're at a point in history now where there's, in many cases, very few individuals who have a whole lot of power and they think they can manage everything. Either they're naive or, in over their head and trying to convince to you that they actually know what's going on. Bitcoin doesn't have that, right? Bitcoin is global consensus. There's a set of rules that people follow. And I think we can feel like with a high level of confidence that the core DNA and rules that make up Bitcoin today are going to be that way in the future. Number five, Bitcoin can easily be transferred, right? Again, it's money. And so why are you buying bonds, right? You have money, you want to put your money someplace safe so you can have more money in the future. Similar reason somebody might buy Bitcoin. You got money, you want to buy Bitcoin, so you have more, spending power in the future. But the difference is, money's meant to be used at some point as well. And so if you want to use it, got to transfer it. And you can't just transfer, if you have a bond and it's paying you 5% and you want to buy a product from somebody and you're in California and they're in London, not necessarily so easy to just be like, all right, let me pay you with this bond, right? You can't pay somebody in Singapore with a bond the same way you can just show me your QR, boop, scan it, send Bitcoin, transfer it. Number six, Bitcoin is globally accessible. And yes, there is other countries and foreign actors who buy American bonds or American treasuries, but that market is not easily globally accessible to individuals across the world who want to get out of their currency, buy dollars, and park their money in bonds and trust in the US government. But Bitcoin's accessible to everybody generally everywhere now. Number 7, Bitcoin is a max supply, right? With bonds, governments can continue to issue more and continue to issue more, and ultimately the value in them is really going to be, okay, what's the rate of return I'm getting from this, right? And so, for a long time, you had US bonds paying basically almost nothing, right? 0.5%, 1%. We've seen them get higher now, all the while, again, they're losing to inflation because they can just issue more, right? And as they issue more, you could see a number of countries, like look at Japan, they just issue more and more and more and start to play yield curve control, try to keep the yields down, and the bonds pay nothing, basically, right? And people are just borrowing them to then convert out of it to go speculate on some other trade. But it's like, what are you holding at the end of the day? It's not. I just think the asset's clearly inferior to Bitcoin in that way, because of the flaws of ultimately what you're holding. And number 8, Bitcoin doesn't have credit risk in the same way. Wildly different asset, right? Bitcoin is the money. It's like, everything else is credit, right? Bitcoin is the money, everything else is credit at the end of the day, because you actually have the bare asset. If I send it to you, I don't have the bare asset anymore. You have the bare asset now. And so it's not some IOU credit layer happening on top of that where we just hope it goes well until somebody, acts mischievous, rehypothecates, gets offsides, and then all of a sudden there's collateral damage because somebody blew up, right? Bitcoin doesn't have that at the end of the day. That can happen because of derivatives and different things people may be trading, on Bitcoin above it, but that's meaningfully different than credit risk of a government, right? And being able to continue to meet those obligations, which, like the US, for example, they can't default. They can't not pay the bills, or else you just lose all credibility. And so the only way through is really forward, right? That means to keep printing, and they can't default. And if you're, again, sitting there holding bonds, holding dollars, you're going to continue to get debased at a level that just will leave people to fall generally further and further behind. All that to say, I think Bitcoin is the escape hatch. It's the off-ramp to get away from that. And I hope this video was relatively convincing of that. Thank you guys for sticking around. I appreciate it. Got more videos coming on the way. Be sure to like the video, please, and comment if there's another topic or something you'd like me to cover. See you soon.